Hello, and welcome to CRPS Contender, my complex regional pain syndrome education channel. Today's video is Alexithymia, Affective States, Connecting Physical and Mental Processes, Approach and Avoid, Pleasure and Pain, Joy and Fear. I'd like to start this video saying it's probably not going to be under 15 minutes. I have been trying to make them shorter, but I don't think this is going to be one of them. I would like to also begin by reiterating something that I have been quite open about on this channel, but this is a large series and I just want to make it very clear. I am not a doctor. Research is how I learn, and I do make occasional errors. I do my best to try to correct any misinformation I provide, but I have not had any formal medical education. I do attempt to provide quality content with scientific sources and empirical evidence. But please, if you are at all questioning anything that I promote on this channel, I suggest that you, 1, check out my source sheets listed in the descriptions below, talk to your doctor, or research for yourself. And don't just take me at my word. Please make sure that it holds up to scrutiny. Narrow Mind Till the Soul Begins to Break, which this video is a part of, is a playlist that contains my personal hypothesis. I have been stuck with the creation of this video, not due to a lack of content, but instead due to an overabundance of information and time constraints of creating a video that doesn't lose people's attention. I have a tendency to get really focused on the details, and when you have 37 sources and 33 pages of notes, which are, of course, linked in the description if you want to check them out, but when you have that much information, it can be really, really challenging to try and condense it down to a 10 or 15 minute video. I kind of lose the forest for the trees and lose sight of the bigger picture. So I want to just zoom out for a moment to remember the purpose of this hypothesis. I have 2 main goals. One is the management after CRPS has been triggered. I have 3 main subpoints there. I want to promote treatment that is effective, efficient, accessible, and affordable, to help people learn how to mitigate the effects of a dysregulated nervous system, and promote people practicing resilience to earn regulation through dedicated effort. But even on top of the management of CRPS, I want to prevent CRPS from happening in the first place, which means creating a risk profile for the people who are more likely to develop it. Being able to give closer observation of those who are at risk, particularly after a surgery or an injury. I want to promote preventative mind-body work so that they never develop it. But if it does develop, if it is triggered, have immediate recognition, diagnosis, and intervention so that that person can make the most use of the first 6 months of CRPS when remission is most likely. Having said that, let's talk about one such risk marker in my opinion: alexithymia. Alexithymia is having no words for emotions. It's not a diagnosis, but it is a useful construct for those with difficulty experiencing, identifying, or expressing emotion. It is linked with ASD, ADHD, PTSD, depression, eating disorders, schizophrenia, and neurodegenerative diseases. It looks like a logical, rigid thinking style that doesn't account for emotions. Poor stress coping skills, appearing distant, rigid, and humorless, and lacking standard fantasies and imagination. Alexithymia means you have difficulty with introspection and observing your own mental and emotional processes. It creates confusion around bodily sensations connected to emotion, difficulty communicating that emotion to others, and difficulty identifying and responding to other people's emotions. This can create a lack of lived understanding or acknowledgement of your own emotional experiences. It's important to note that all feelings are ultimately bodily feelings. And when you can't connect to that or recognize it, it means you aren't connecting with and recognizing your own body. When you have no story to tell others, That often means you have no story to tell yourself, creating an impaired identity. Our own self-knowledge depends heavily on the stories we tell ourselves about who we are as individuals. The opposite end of the spectrum of alexithymia is emotional literacy, which is the ability to express your feelings with specific words. Now, in this Narrow Mind Till the Soul Begins to Break series, so far, we have discussed several aspects of connection of the brain, connection to other people, authenticity, betrayal, adverse childhood experiences, and addiction. After this one, we will be talking much more about the emotional aspect relating to the ego, consciousness, motivation, and the function of emotions, what happens when they get suppressed, and things like that. But before we can move into the more complex emotions, we need to talk about something even more basic. This is known as your affect, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. In the creation of emotion, we have three parts, 3 steps: feeling, perception, and evaluation. Feeling happens in your peripheral nervous system when you sense things. Perception happens in your limbic system. This is what you notice. And evaluation happens in your cortex. This is what you analyze, your evaluation of what you have noticed. Alesthesia is Greek for changed sensation. And this is the relationship between your physical internal state and your perception of stimuli. Alesthesia is applied to the sensory component of emotions. Now, emotions just means a motivational mental state. It's to promote you doing something. So we're going to talk about the sensory aspect first. Sensation has 3 parts: qualitative, quantitative, and affective, which means what's its nature, how intense is it, and is it useful or not. Affect is what we're going to be focusing on today, which is a sensation's usefulness to the organism. Affect ranges a spectrum from unpleasant to neutral to pleasant. As your internal state is in constant change, the usefulness of a sensation will also change. Your affect is the basis of which emotions are experienced by that individual. So if you have an unpleasant affect, you will experience unpleasant emotions. If you have a pleasant affect, you will experience pleasant emotions. So it is important that we understand this and how the physical state of the body affects which emotions you are experiencing. The main purpose of affect is approach or avoid. It connects the body and the brain. Affect is how a stimulus feels instinctually, whether it's pleasurable or displeasurable. And so how your body feels about it will affect how your brain ends up feeling about it. The purpose of affect is to motivate useful behaviors and inhibit non-useful or damaging behaviors. This is the base state for more complex perceptions and appraisals. A positive affect would be pleasure and a sign of useful stimuli. This promotes approach behavior and can create joy. Negative affect is displeasure. This is a sign of danger. It promotes avoid behavior and the emotion fear. Now, there are, of course, other negative and positive emotions that it could promote, but I'm specifically going to be talking about fear and joy today because they are some of the emotions that we have the least control over. So I'm going to talk about those 2 specifically, but of course this could broaden to other emotions as well. Usefulness and danger are judged by limbic circuits with reference to homeostasis, which is your body remaining in balance with the environment and in balance within itself. So let's first talk about the function of pleasure. Pleasure is a sort of gloss on a sensation, an added value. It's an evolutionary trick to motivate the subject to pursue rewards that are needed for survival fitness. Pleasure drives consummation. It is like. This is different from want, which is seeking, compulsion, pursuit, the chase. Want orients around your dopamine system, and pushed to an extreme, this leads to addictive behaviors and addictive patterning. Like orients around your opiate system, promoting calmness and social bonding. Your opioid system is activated during the actual hedonic experience of the reward. The capacity for pleasure is essential to health and well-being. Affective disorders produce either an absence of pleasure reactions or the presence of excessive displeasure. When you have a disconnect between wanting and liking, the dopamine and the internal opioid system, the getting it and enjoying it, when there's the dissociation there, the disconnection, this causes a loss of pleasure, known as anhedonia, and a negative affect, known as dysphoria. This is the result of the breakdown of cognitive control, what you think about it, how you feel about it, rather than the loss of the sensory pleasure itself. Now let's discuss the function of fear. Fear is induced by a perceived danger or threat. It's the awareness of being in harm's way. Fear is an innate capacity of human nature, but the specifics are learned from experience or witnessing. Danger is universal, but the experience of being in danger is uniquely personal. Fear is a perception, not an action. It's an intermediate process linking sensory processing to action selection, allowing the body to conduct orchestrated coordination to arouse peak performance to avoid, escape, and confront. Threat detection, which is fear, versus defensive responding, like aggression, are interlinked, but they are distinct from each other. Fear stimulates a combination of defensive responses for protection from environmental trauma. Fear is a central motivational state, and it links sets of stimuli to patterns of behavior. Conditioned fear provides critical survival-related functions, promoting physiological, behavioral, and interpretative responses to stimuli, leading to fleeing, fighting, or freezing. Emotions are decoupled reflexes. Unlike fixed action pattern reflexes, fear is more flexible and context-dependent, and it can exist both prior to and after the stimuli has occurred. Flight and other active coping mechanisms are unconditional responses to a proximal threat. Passive coping mechanisms, like freezing, are conditioned to distal stimuli predictive of danger. These two strategies, active or passive coping mechanisms, have distinct roles, and which one you select is modulated by your appraisal of success and your ability to escape. What are some things that arouse the state of fear? Unpredictability, social context, interoception, and anxiety. Let's talk about unpredictability first. This is temporal uncertainty, not knowing when something's going to happen, a novel stimuli, it's new to you, you haven't experienced it before, and knowing that there's something that you don't know. In a social context, this could look like someone behaving in an aggressive or dominant manner, social defeat, an inability to defend your territory against intrusion, learned helplessness, or depression. Interoceptive signals are signals that are coming from inside your body. Such things that bring about the state of fear are suffocation, panting, acidosis, or major homeostatic imbalances. The extent of primary interoceptive fear triggers is unclear at this time. And anxiety. Fear is adaptive but transient to confront a threatening stimuli. Anxiety is a prolonged state of prediction and preparedness. The difference between fear and anxiety is similar to the distinction between an emotion and a mood. One is much more short-lived and in response to a specific triggering event, whereas the mood would be a much more baseline state that lasts a much longer time. Barlow presented 3 vulnerability factors for anxiety. 1 is generalized biological factors. This is mainly the result of genetics. 2 is generalized psychological factors. This is mainly the result of early life experiences, such as the ACEs. 3 is the result of specific psychological factors, mainly due to specific events or circumstances. There is no single brain structure for processing fear, and fear is subjective and depends entirely upon the conscious experience of the individual. Human beings can trigger fear and anxiety merely by thinking about certain stimuli, meaning they do not actually have to be present in the moment. Now let's discuss the function of pain. Pain motivates withdrawal from damage, protection of bodily integrity, and avoidance of repeat pain. you have three pain thresholds that I want to discuss. Perception of pain, which is when your pain starts to be felt. The pain intensity threshold, which is when your pain starts to hurt. And your pain tolerance threshold, which is when you act to stop the pain. Pain is the result of sensory nerve fibers responding to stimuli that are approaching a harmful intensity. You've got four major types of pain: visceral pain, deep somatic pain, superficial somatic pain, and neuropathic pain. And I'm not going to get into the details about any of those in this video. Persistent pain can lead to sensitization, meaning there's enhanced excitability of the nerves, a heightened sensitivity to stimuli, and enhanced processing of pain messages in the brain. The awareness of pain is a perception and is therefore subjective and cannot be directly or objectively measured. The ability to detect noxious stimuli is essential to survival and well-being. Pain is a signal of damage. It is not the problem, but instead part of the solution. Pain motivates us to solve a problem of what is causing the damage. It's more in line with a homeostatic sensation arising from a degenerate state. Other homeostatic sensations include hunger, thirst, itch, shortness of breath, the urge to void, the urge to defecate, feeling too hot, and feeling too cold. Homeostatic sensations are imperative. Their function is to motivate, not to inform. They signal appropriate action rather than explaining underlying pathology. Homeostatic sensations are more flexible than reflexes. They are conscious and they can be prioritized and planned around. However, they continue to motivate appropriate action, even if they are consciously overridden. And they will continue until one takes action that removes the threat to bodily integrity that causes that sensation initially. Pain motivates protection. Pain is a perception of what's happening inside your body. It is essential to warn, detect, and minimize contact with damaging stimuli. It alerts you to threats of bodily integrity. It motivates us towards or away from certain actions, allowing for healing and threat removal. As a homeostatic sensation, there is the ability to ignore pain and attend to more important matters. Anything that is more important for survival than pain exerts anti-nociceptive effects. There are three major types of pain. Nociceptive pain, which senses intense, noxious stimuli, such as tissue damage. It is a high threshold pain, and it is a protective role for immediate attention and response. Inflammatory pain is for healing and protection of an injured area. This is the result of an immune response, and it provokes tenderness and sensitivity. And finally, there's pathological pain, which is maladaptive, abnormal function of the nervous system. This is a low threshold pain which amplifies pain signals. The biopsychosocial model recognizes that emotional stress and fear impacts one's pain levels. The bio represents the nociceptive processes and the physiological aspects. The psychosocial aspect involves emotion, based in the midbrain, and cognition, which is the meaning that is attached. Now I want to discuss two major behavioral systems: the behavioral activation system and the behavioral inhibition system. Let's start with the behavioral activation system. We have two main circuits in this system, one for reward and one for punishment. The reward circuit, which is the medial forebrain bundle, activates in a desire, action, satisfaction cycle. It promotes approach behavior, and once you have gained what you were approaching, you feel satisfaction or reward from attaining it. The punishment circuit, known as the periventricular system, is activated when deciding to fight or flee. It promotes avoid behavior. Adverse stimuli activates the punishment circuit to help us cope with unpleasant situations. The periventricular system stimulates your sympathetic nervous system and the secretion of adrenocorticotropic hormone. The ACTH stimulates your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and the adrenal glands release adrenaline as a result. The adrenaline release creates a flare in those individuals with CRPS. The punishment circuit can inhibit the function of the reward circuit. This means that fear and punishment can drive out pleasure. Now let's discuss the behavioral inhibition system. This system is activated when actions are ineffective and fight or flight is impossible. The behavioral inhibition system activates when the only choice left to survive is to submit and bear it. It is useful when operating intermittently, temporarily preventing useless action from worsening a situation. However, when human relationships are based on competition, the behavioral inhibition system is continually activated to avoid retaliation. It no longer is an adaptive interval between approach and avoid, but instead is a source of chronic anxiety. This sense of unease gradually undermines health and wellness, and there are many documented consequences of a chronically activated behavioral inhibition system. Direct sensory pleasures and psychological pleasures originating in memory, imagination, and anticipation are the same to the human brain. Physical pain and social pain are also the same in the human brain. Our nervous systems are not self-contained, but are instead attuned to those around us and close to us, and continually concerned for and about the emotions of others. Human beings' worldviews are heavily emotion-laden. In avoiding pain and seeking pleasure, humans have become hyper-emotional, hyper-social animals who seek to amplify sensations that they experience as pleasant. Humans proceed through life driven by a permanent hedonic gradient, and this gradient is sustained by alternating pleasant and unpleasant emotions. Pain and pleasure are not symmetrical, and they don't occur in equal amounts. However, the absence of both pain and pleasure is not a normal state. The normal state is to be sensitive to pain and to yearn for pleasure. Biological sensing systems respond to changes in incoming stimuli, not the magnitude of the incoming stimuli. If a stimulus is maintained, sensor sensitivity decreases. This is known as sensory accommodation. An example would be there's a loud, annoying fan in a room, but after an hour or two, you no longer really notice that it's there because you have accommodated to that stimulus. In human beings, sensory accommodation has a counterpart in hedonic accommodation. Emotional responses to a pleasant stimulus also weaken or completely cease if that stimulus is constant. Achieving zero pain and maximum pleasure has driven our modern economy at all levels. However, happiness as a limitless pleasure runs counter to fundamental biological fact. With that understanding, let's discuss the function of joy. If you only take one thing away from this video today, let it be this. The satisfaction of the need for security is a precondition for the unfolding of all other needs. Joy is the perception of being secure when one appraises their environment as both familiar and safe. Joy motivates us to increase our effort to act, to intervene, to improve, to move towards goals. Joy promotes feelings of freedom and ease, an internal sensation of bright lightness, and colors become more vivid. Joy is a state of bodily comfort, of a rightly regulated equilibrium, promoting optimal physiological coordination. Movements become more fluid, smiles become more frequent, thinking broadens, and playfulness increases. Joy occurs when an outcome that is hoped for but not presumed happens, or when one progresses towards a goal faster than expected. On a scale of emotional control, joy ranks the lowest. You have the least control over the emotion of joy, and it cannot be voluntarily produced. A positive thing to note is that joy is correlated with gratitude, meaning that grateful people are more likely to experience joy, and joyful people are more likely to experience gratitude. This creates a mutually reinforcing upward joy-gratitude spiral. You cannot choose to be joyful. However, you can choose to be grateful. Gratitude is an action that can be learned and practiced. So how? How do you practice this? 3 steps. Notice good things. pay attention to those good things, like really go into them and soak them up, and then express your appreciation for that good thing. Personally, I found this the easiest to do out in nature. I am fortunate to live in an area where I am absolutely surrounded by gorgeous views. So when I go out for my walks, I'll try and find something, some view, some piece of nature that I just enjoy looking at. And then I'll stand there and I'll just look at it. And I'll pay attention to it. And I'll notice the way the light hits it, and what shade the colors are, and the little details on it. And then I'll express that I liked it. It doesn't take very long, only a couple seconds at a time, but that's a way to train yourself to start noticing things that can improve your mental state. Personally, I have found nature to be much easier than things like interpersonal relations or more societal contexts. So nature or animals. If you've got a dog or a cat, I'm sure that your animals spark some sort of joy for you, things that make you feel lighter. And just noticing that, paying attention to it and stating it, can be a great way to get started down practicing gratitude. Changing your affect can absolutely change your entire world. Now, in practical application, there is a method that I would like to bring to your attention, known as the KonMari method. Now, this is a method that is originally intended for tidying homes. Its purpose is to remove clutter that hampers you from living your life to its fullest potential. And this method is a marathon, not a sprint. But the question of what you possess is actually the question of how you want to live your life. This is a simple, effective method to learn to listen to your inner voice and to promote connection with it. The statement is, this one sparks joy, feeling lighter, feeling uplifted instead of weighed down. So, the question I want you to ask yourself when you're doing something is, does this one spark joy? If yes, keep doing it. If no, then release with gratitude. Releasing with gratitude is an opportunity to learn from the things that you discard, especially things that you have used extensively. Now, in the KonMari method, they are talking about physical possessions. However, I challenge you to apply this to your own perspectives, to your traits, to your patterns of thought, and your patterns of behavior. Do not underestimate the importance of gratitude in the ability to adjust your affect. And a reminder again that changing your affect can change your world. My next section, I'm going to be talking about two major events that I experienced that were really turning points in my healing journey. So if you're not interested in that, I've covered all the content in this video, you can stop here. But if you would like to hear, I'm going to talk on for a few more minutes about my personal experiences. There were two major realizations that I had that I would say were the real turning points to me improving. The first was after my first round of ketamine infusions. I had 3 of them, back to back, and they were horrifying and a visceral terror. And then eventually I had to go back for more. Leading up to it, it's very unpleasant. I was short-tempered and controlling and lashing out. And so I went by myself late at night on a walk. And walked. Not very far, because I couldn't at the time. But I got out, and I went and I sat by myself. And I was talking round and round and round and round in circles, rationalizing, why are you like this, blah, blah, blah. Going on. And I'd pull up a rationalization, a rational lie, and then I'd go underneath it, and I'd have the next rationalization pop up, and I'd go underneath it, and I'd have the next rationalization. Why, getting further and further and further down, until eventually I realized that I was afraid. Which is something, to that point, that I had severely suppressed and harshly rejected. But I was afraid to go back and do it again. deeply, bone-achingly, gut-wrenchingly afraid. And when I realized that, I had a severe panic attack and broke down in tears, which was very abnormal for me. I didn't cry. I was pretty much incapable of crying. But I sat there sobbing for about 20 minutes, under the paradigm-altering realization: you are afraid, and you've been afraid for a very, very long time. And so that was the first turn towards getting better. The next turn happened multiple weeks later, after several more ketamine infusions. And I had finally started reflex integration physical therapy, which, if you have not done this, I strongly recommend it. But I had had a total of 6 ketamine infusions, and I had started that physical therapy. And I was again walking in the woods one night, and I was slow. I was very slow. My physical state really hadn't improved, even though my pain was greatly reduced due to the ketamine. But I was extremely weak, and my posture and stride were all screwy. I had no stamina and no strength, basically. And so I walked extremely slowly. And instead of beating myself up for it and having lots of negative self-condemnation, I was just grateful to be walking. I was slow, and I was curled all over myself, but I could walk without wanting to die. And I was just grateful to be walking. And that was the second realization, that I could take pleasure in life and just be happy to do something simple like walking. And I started to get better from that point on. It's been an upward trajectory since then. You know, of course, you've still got your ups and downs, but as a general trend, I've been moving upwards since that point. Just over a year ago, shortly after that time of gratitude, is when I decided to make this channel. I, of course, cannot tell you what you should do in your own psychological outlook. But personally, for my own self, I cannot more strongly recommend being honest with yourself about what you're feeling and whether or not you are afraid. And to be able to bring yourself to the position of being able to notice and express appreciation for the good things. And maybe it doesn't make you feel joyful, and that's okay. You can't force yourself to feel joyful because you can't force yourself to feel safe. But if you can move towards safety and expressing the appreciation for the good things and knowing that it's okay to be afraid, then I think you'll see that your health will improve. I'm going to stop my introspection there. However, if you would like to hear more on this, in a few weeks, I will be releasing to this channel a different kind of video for my 1-year anniversary of having this channel active. And it's something I've never done before, but I will discuss in much more detail during that conversation some of my own personal story. And if that interests you, I suggest keeping an eye out for it. So in recap, today we covered intro and disclaimer, the purpose of this hypothesis, alexithymia, having no language for feelings, alesthesia, the affective component, base states, approach or avoid, pleasure, fear, pain, joy, gratitude, and decluttering your affect. Thanks so much for watching. If you would like to contribute to my medical expenses, my Patreon is listed below. You are welcome to share, like, or subscribe. Thank you, Chase, for being my first patron. And as always, relevant sources are linked in the description below. Thanks so much for sticking with me. I hope you learned something today, and I hope to see you next time.